The medical bay of GCS, Undying Resolve, smelled like chemicals and cold metal. The lights were bright white. The walls were smooth and silver. Everything was clean and quiet, until the door slid open and a human was dragged inside. Sergeant Marcus Hawley was not walking on his own. Two Vreth soldiers had his arms over their shoulders. His boots scraped the floor. His face was pale and wet with sweat. His right shoulder had a plasma burn the size of a fist. The skin around it was dark and blistered. The smell was not good. He was making noise. Low sounds. Not screaming, but close. His jaw was tight. His eyes were half closed. Every small movement made him pull breath through his teeth like it cost him something. Dr. Sareth was already standing near the treatment table when they brought Marcus in. Sareth was Vreth, tall and thin with gray skin and 4 long fingers on each hand. His face had no expression. He looked at the human the way someone looks at a broken piece of equipment. Useful once. Now a problem. Beside Sareth stood Faven, young Colhary intern with pale green skin and large black eyes that missed nothing. Faven was still in his first year of coalition medical training. He had only worked on 2 humans before. He found them strange. Too soft. Too loud about everything. The Vreth soldiers put Marcus on the table. He hit the surface and made a sharp sound, and then pressed his lips together, hard like he was angry at himself for making it. Sareth walked over slowly. He looked at the burn. He tilted his head. He did not rush. Faven leaned close to Sareth and spoke in Colhary, quiet and fast because the translator implants most humans carried were set to common tongue only, and Colhary dialect needed a separate module that almost no human bothered to install. Almost no human. Faven said in Colhary that this one seemed very upset for such a surface wound. Sareth made a small sound in the back of his throat, something between agreement and amusement. He said that humans were like this. The database listed them as mid-tier endurance. In practice, they were much lower. He had worked with a Vreth soldier once who had 3 broken ribs and a punctured side and never changed his face. This human had a shoulder burn and was practically weeping. Faven smiled. It was not a kind smile. Marcus was staring at the ceiling. His breathing was steady, slowly, but his hands were pressing flat against the table like he was holding himself down. Sareth picked up a scanner and ran it over the shoulder without warning. The scanner made a low sound. Sareth read the numbers. The burn was deep, second layer of tissue, nerve exposure on the upper edge. Painful. Very painful by most species standards. For Vreth, it would have been unpleasant. For humans who were, according to everything Sareth had been taught, not built for much, it was apparently catastrophic. Faven spoke again in Colhary. He said he had read that humans sometimes lost consciousness from pain alone. He asked if this one was going to do that. Sarah said he did not think so. He said humans were dramatic but rarely actually broken. Marcus turned his head slowly and looked at both of them. His eyes were gray. Very gray. The kind of gray that does not look warm. He said nothing. Sareth cleared his throat and switched to common tongue. He said he needed to access the patient medical file to calibrate pain treatment dosage. He said it was standard. He held out a small data pad toward Marcus and asked him to confirm identity. Marcus lifted his left hand, the good one, and pressed his thumb to the pad. The file opened. Sareth looked at it. He did not speak. Faven looked over his shoulder to see what had made the doctor go quiet. The screen showed a patient history log. Most coalition soldiers had a file between 4 and 8 pages. Enough to show what had happened to them and how it was treated. Clean records. Short. The number at the bottom right corner of Marcus Hale's file showed 47 pages. Sareth stared at the number. Then he looked at Marcus. Marcus was still looking at the ceiling, still breathing carefully, still pressing his hands flat against the table, like something inside him was working very hard to stay calm. Sareth pressed the scroll button and the file began to move. Page 1 showed basic biology. Human male, 31 years of age. Enlisted at 18. First active duty at 19. Page 2 was where the injuries began. Sareth read the first entry. Then he read it again. His 4 fingers went very still on the datapad. Behind him, Faven stopped smiling. The medical bay was quiet except for the low hum of the ship and the sound of Marcus Hawley breathing through a pain that the 2 aliens in the room had, 30 seconds ago, decided was not worth taking seriously. Sareth looked at the entry one more time. He looked at the date. He looked at the notes written by the field medic who had treated Marcus 12 years ago. The notes were short and factual, and they described something that Sareth, with all his training and all his years of practice, was not sure he fully believed. He turned around slowly. He looked at Marcus. Marcus had turned his head again and was watching him now. Those gray eyes. That flat expression that was not quite calm, more like a man who had decided that whatever he felt was not going to be the thing that showed on his face. Sareth did not speak for a moment. Then he asked, quietly, in common tongue this time, how long Marcus had been feeling pain in the shoulder before the mission ended. Marcus blinked. He said the mission ended about 4 hours after he took the hit. Sareth said he understood that. He asked how long Marcus had been feeling pain before that. Marcus looked at him like the question was strange. He said the whole time. Sareth looked down at the datapad in his hand. Page 2. Entry 1. 12 years ago. The details were already making Faven shift, his weight from one foot to the other, in a way that had nothing to do with being tired. They had not yet reached page 3. The file had 47 pages. Sareth set the datapad down on the edge of the treatment table, gently, the way someone sets down a thing they are not sure how to hold anymore. Marcus watched him do it. He said nothing. The room was very quiet. Sareth did not start the treatment right away. He stood with the datapad in his hand, and he read. That was all. He just stood there and read. The medical bay was quiet. Marcus was still on the table. Faven had stopped moving completely. Even the hum of the ship seemed lower somehow, like the room was holding itself still. Page 2. First entry. Marcus Hawley, age 19. Training exercise in the Dravak Mountains on the human colony world of Callum Station. A trench collapsed. A support beam came down. It hit Marcus across the left leg. The femur, the long thick bone that runs from hip to knee, broke completely. Clean fracture. The field medic who responded wrote that the fracture was severe and that immediate evacuation was required. Marcus was not evacuated. The note below the field medic's entry was written by a different person, a mission commander. It said that Private Hawley refused evacuation, that the team still had 6 hours of objective left, that Hawley stated he could continue and did continue. The mission was completed. Hawley reported to medical 6 hours and 40 minutes after the injury occurred. He had walked on a broken femur for 6 hours and 40 minutes. Sareth read it twice. Faven made a very small sound. Sareth turned one page. Age 22. A combat deployment. Enemy contact in a narrow corridor. Marcus took shrapnel from a close explosion. Small pieces of metal fragments in the side and back. 11 pieces total removed in surgery. The unusual part was not the injury. The unusual part was the word written in bold at the top of the entry. It said, delayed treatment 31 hours. 31 hours. Faven leaned forward and read it himself. He looked up at Marcus. Marcus was not looking at them. He was looking at the ceiling again with that flat, careful expression. Faven asked, in common tongue this time, without thinking, why there was a 31-hour delay. Marcus did not look away from the ceiling. He said the extraction took a long time. Faven said he meant why Marcus had not treated the shrapnel wounds himself during the 31 hours. Standard coalition field kits had enough equipment to manage fragment wounds for days. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said there were 14 people in his unit, and 7 of them needed the kit more than he did. He said shrapnel does not kill you fast as long as nothing vital is hit. He said he checked. Nothing vital was hit. So he waited. Sarah set the datapad down on the table. He pressed both his palms flat on the surface and looked at it. Page 3 had not even started yet. He turned to page 3. Age 23. A punctured lung. The medical note said the puncture was caused by a fractured rib that shifted during a fall from a transport vehicle. The lung was not fully collapsed, only partial. The field notes said that Marcus had reported mild chest discomfort during a patrol briefing 4 hours after the vehicle incident. The medic who examined him discovered the puncture. The medic wrote, and Sarah read this part out loud by accident, that the patient showed no signs of distress and had completed a 4-kilometer patrol circuit before reporting. A partial punctured lung. 4-kilometer patrol. Faven sat down on a nearby stool. Not because he was tired. His legs had simply made that decision without asking him. Sarah kept reading. He did not read out loud anymore. His mouth had closed. His face, which had started the evening open and slightly amused, was now doing something different. It was the face of a person solving a problem that keeps getting bigger every time they look at it. Burns on page 5. Marcus had caught fire in a fuel explosion during a rescue operation at age 24. The burns covered his left arm and the left side of his neck. 2nd and 3rd degree. The entry noted that Marcus had carried an injured squadmate approximately 200 meters before setting her down and locating cover. The burns were treated after the squadmate was stable. Frostbite on page 7. A winter mission on a planet called Harkin 4, where temperatures dropped below anything Sareth would have stepped outside in. Marcus had given his thermal layer to a wounded Kalhari soldier, a species that could not regulate heat at all in those conditions, and completed the mission in basic underlayer. 4 of his fingers were affected. The damage was permanent in 2 of them. Nerve function never fully returned. He had given away his protection. He had kept moving anyway. Page 9 had the entry that made Sareth put the datapad down fully and not pick it up again for almost a full minute. Age 26. A vehicle rollover in hostile terrain. 3 soldiers in the vehicle. 1 was killed on impact. 1 had a broken arm. Marcus had 3 cracked vertebrae, bones in the spine. The spine. The structure that holds the body upright and carries every signal from the brain to the legs. The mission note said Marcus helped a surviving soldier out of the wreck, helped her walk 2 kilometers to the rally point, called in the casualty report, gave full mission debrief. Then he said, only after all of that, that his back was bothering him. 3 cracked vertebrae. Bothering him. The medic at the rally point wrote in the notes, and the medic had clearly been upset when writing. This because the handwriting changed, that the patient had declined 3 separate requests to sit down during the debrief, that he had stood through the entire thing, that when the medic finally scanned him and saw the spinal damage, the medic had told Marcus he should not have been standing at all. The medic wrote that Marcus had looked at the scan results and said he had wondered why his legs felt a little strange. Sareth looked up from the pad. He looked at Marcus lying on the treatment table with his burned shoulder and his tight jaw and his steady, careful breathing. He thought about himself, about Vreth, who did not feel pain the way other species did. Vreth nerve clusters were deep and distributed. A wound that would send a cohery to the floor barely registered. They had always considered this a strength. They had always considered high pain response a weakness, a flaw, something to be trained away or quietly pitied in species that had it. Vreth was a doctor. He knew the science. He knew that pain was a signal, that it existed to tell a body to stop, that ignoring it was dangerous and in most species impossible to do consistently. He pulled up the human physiological database on a second screen. He had looked at it before, years ago, during his xenobiology training. Humans were mid-tier. Standard pain response. Standard nerve sensitivity. Nothing remarkable. He read it more carefully now. There was a section he had skimmed before. A subsection on the neurological response titled Volitional Pain Suppression. He had skipped it because the title sounded theoretical. A lot of xenobiology entries described theoretical abilities that species had in extreme conditions. Rare, not standard. Not worth memorizing. He read it now. It said that human beings under conditions of sufficient psychological pressure, mission focus being the most documented example, were capable of producing neurochemical responses that actively reduce pain signal transmission to the conscious mind. Not numbness, not damage to the nerve. The signal still traveled. The body still knew. But the brain, the human brain specifically, could place that signal behind a door, unlock the door, and keep working. The document called it a survival adaptation. It noted that the suppression was not permanent. It noted that when the mission was over, when the human finally stopped, the pain returned. Sometimes all at once. Vreth looked at Marcus. Marcus had been in this medical bay for 20 minutes. He was only in this kind of pain now because the mission was over. Because he had stopped. The plasma burn had happened 4 hours ago. What had Marcus been doing for 4 hours? Vreth did not need to ask. He looked at the mission report that had been filed alongside the medical intake. Marcus had organized the post-skirmish perimeter, had helped move 2 wounded soldiers to cover, had given a field assessment to the commanding officer, had submitted an equipment damage report. Then he had sat down, and apparently only then had his body reminded him that his shoulder was gone. Vreth closed the database. He looked at the 47-page file on the datapad. He had read 9 pages. 9. He was not sure he wanted to read the rest. Not because it would be worse. He was fairly certain it would be worse. He was not sure he wanted to know how much worse. Faven was still sitting on the stool. He had not spoken in a long time. He was looking at Marcus with his large black eyes, and his face had the expression of someone who has just realized they said something very stupid in front of someone they should have respected from the beginning. Vreth straightened up. He smoothed the front of his coat. He picked up the treatment tools because Marcus still needed care and the burn was still real and still serious. But something had shifted in the room. The air was the same. The lights were the same. The chemical smell was the same. But something had shifted. Vreth began preparing the treatment without a word. His movements were precise and careful now in a way they had not been 20 minutes ago, when he had looked at this human and thought the word dramatic. He did not say that word anymore. Not even in his head. He cleaned the burn, applied the first layer of regenerative compound, set the nerve block patch along the upper edge of the wound where the damage was deepest. His hands moved carefully, more carefully than before. He did not rush. He did not speak for a long time. Marcus lay still. He watched the ceiling. His breathing had slowed. The nerve block was starting to work, and some of the tension had left his jaw. He looked tired now. Not dramatic. Just tired. the kind of tired that lives in a person's eyes and does not go away after one good sleep. Faven had not left the stool. He was pretending to organize a tray of tools near the back wall. But he was not organizing anything. He was listening. Sareth finished the first stage of treatment, and then he asked the question that had been sitting in the room for the last 20 minutes waiting for someone to say it out loud. He asked Marcus why he had not mentioned his pain history during intake. Standard intake for any coalition medical case included a pain tolerance self-assessment. It was on the form. It affected dosage. It affected how the medical team prepared. It was, as Sareth had told hundreds of patients, important information. And Marcus had filled in the box that asked him to rate his general pain tolerance from 1 to 10. He had written 6. Just 6. Middle of the scale. Marcus turned his head and looked at Sareth. He said he did not think it was relevant. Sareth looked at him for a moment. Then he said, very carefully, that a 47-page injury file was extremely relevant to pain treatment. Marcus looked back at the ceiling. He was quiet for a second. Then he said he had a shoulder burn. He said the form was about current condition. His current condition was a shoulder burn. He had rated that. A 6 seemed right. It hurt. It was not the worst thing he had ever dealt with. 6 seemed accurate. Sareth opened his mouth and then closed it. He asked about the femur. The first entry in the file. Age, 19. The broken leg in the Vreth Mountains. He said he wanted to understand. He said that a broken femur caused extraordinary pain in almost every species with a skeletal structure similar to humans. He said that walking on one, even briefly, was something most patients described as beyond the edge of what they thought they could handle. He asked how Marcus had walked on one for nearly 7 hours. Marcus was quiet for longer this time. Not like he was hiding something. More like he was actually trying to remember. Like the incident was a long time ago and he had to reach back for it. He said the team had a window. An extraction window. If they missed it, there was no second one until the next day, and staying in the mountains overnight in that terrain was a much bigger problem than a broken leg. He said he looked at the situation, and the broken leg was the thing he had the most control over. So he dealt with it. Sareth asked if it hurt. Marcus looked at him again with those gray eyes and said yes. Of course it hurt. Sareth asked then how he kept moving. Marcus was quiet again. His good hand was resting on his stomach. He looked at it for a moment, like he was thinking about how to explain something that had never seemed complicated to him before. He said that hurt is just information. It tells you something is wrong. He said he already knew something was wrong. The bone was broken and he could feel it moving when he walked, and that was bad. Information, but it was not new information. He already had that information. So the pain was not telling him anything he did not know. And once you know a thing already, the reminder of it does not need to stop you. Faven had gone completely still near the back wall. Sareth looked at Marcus for a long moment and did not speak. Then he turned one page in the file on his pad and asked about the entry at age 26. The cracked vertebrae. The vehicle rollover. A vehicle rollover. He asked because that entry specifically had bothered him more than the others. Vertebrae were not like a leg. Vertebrae were the spine. Damaged spine bones could shift, could press against the spinal cord, could, in a bad scenario, cause permanent paralysis from the point of damage downward. He asked Marcus if he had known that when he stood up after the rollover. Marcus said yes. He had done field medicine training. He knew what spinal injuries could mean. Sareth asked why he stood up anyway. Marcus turned his head and looked at the far wall. Not the ceiling this time. The wall. Like there was something there only he could see. He said that Corporal Yenna, the soldier who had survived with the broken arm, had a bad break. Compound. The bone had come through the skin. She was in shock. She was not going to walk out of there alone, and she was not going to be calm enough to stay put and wait alone either. He said the rollover site was in a bad position, and if enemy contact came through that valley, they needed to be somewhere else. He said Yenna needed someone to walk with her. He said he stood up. The medical bay was very quiet. Sareth looked down at the entry on his pad. The medic's note from the rally point. The part where the medic had written that Marcus stood through the entire debrief. That his legs felt a little strange. Sareth had read that part and thought it sounded casual, dismissive, like Marcus was being careless with his own body. He did not think that anymore. He thought about Yenna needing someone to walk with her. He thought about a man with 3 cracked vertebrae making the calculation that moving was more dangerous than not moving. But that leaving someone alone in shock was, in his judgment, the worst risk of the two, and so he had simply stood up and accepted that risk into his own body and walked. Sareth asked very quietly if he could ask one more thing. Marcus said yes. Sareth looked at the file. He asked if Marcus remembered which incident had been logged as a grade 3 spinal compression at age 28. Because there were 2 entries that year, and he was not sure which one the compression referred to. Marcus frowned at the ceiling. His brow came down. He was genuinely trying to remember. Several seconds passed. He said he was not sure. He said he thought maybe it was the Gorn station job, but it might have been the Callum resupply. That one had been rough. He said he would have to look at the dates. He could not remember which spinal injury it was. There had been enough of them that he could not place them by type anymore. Faven made a sound. A very small sound. He turned away quickly and went back to the tray of tools and did not turn around again for a while. His shoulders were up near his ears, and he was doing something with his breathing that looked like control. Sareth finished the 2nd stage of treatment. He sealed the upper edge of the burn. He checked the nerve block. He wrote the discharge instructions on a small card. Lower activity for 3 days and return if the skin around the wound changed color. Then he stopped. He set the card down on the table next to Marcus. He said, in common tongue, that he wanted to correct something he had said earlier in the room. Before treatment began, he said he had made a comment in Kalori that he had believed Marcus would not understand. He said the comment was about humans being dramatic about pain. He said the comment was wrong, and he said he was sorry for making it. Marcus looked at him. He said he had heard it. Sareth nodded once. He said he had suspected. Marcus picked up the discharge card with his good hand. He looked at it. He said it was fine. The people looked at the shape of a thing and made a guess. He said it was human too. They did it also. He said it was not a problem. Sareth said it was still wrong. Marcus said yes. It was. But it was fine. He sat up slowly from the table. He moved carefully, his shoulders stiff under the treatment seal, but he moved without the sounds he had made when they brought him in. The nerve block was doing its job. The pain was behind a door for now. He stood. He was not tall by human standards, but standing next to Sareth, he was solid in a way that had nothing to do with size. Something in how he held himself. Like a person who has learned, over many years, that the ground beneath them is not always safe, and has made peace with that and kept walking anyway. He nodded once at Sareth. He nodded once at Faven, who had turned back around and was standing straight now with his large black eyes very open. Then Marcus Hawley walked out of the medical bay. The door slid shut behind him. The room was still for a moment. Just Sareth and Faven and the clean silver walls and the chemical smell and the datapad on the edge of the table with 38 pages still unread. Faven said, quietly, that he had not understood before. Sareth said he had not either. Faven asked what they should do with that. Sareth looked at the door for a moment. Then he looked at the 47-page file. Then he picked up the datapad and kept reading. Faven did not mean to tell anyone. That was the truth, and he knew it was the truth because he thought about it afterward, really thought about it, and he could not find the moment where he decided to talk. There was no decision. He was at dinner in the crew mess the next morning, and he was sitting with two other Kolhari medics in training, and one of them asked why he looked strange, and he opened his mouth, meaning to say nothing, and instead the whole story came out. The broken femur walked on for 7 hours. The 31-hour shrapnel delay. The punctured lung and the 4-kilometer patrol. The vertebrae. The discharge card that the human had picked up with his good hand and said it was fine. By the time Faven finished talking, his tray of food was cold, and the two other Kolhari were sitting very still. One of them said he did not believe it. Faven pulled up Marcus's file on his training pad, which he was not supposed to do outside the medical bay, but he did it anyway, and showed them entry by entry. They read in silence. The one who had not believed it stopped not believing it somewhere around page 6. By that evening, the story had reached the Vreth section of the crew quarters. It did not travel the way rumors usually did, loud and changed with every telling. It traveled quietly, one person telling another and then showing them the file because no one believed the words alone. You had to see the pages. You had to see the dates and the field medic notes and the words like delayed treatment and refused evacuation and return to duty next morning, sitting there in plain, clean text. A Vreth engineer named Korvath heard the story from a Kolhari technician who worked in his department. Korvath was not the type who found humans interesting. He found them unreliable, too emotional, too variable. He had worked beside humans on 3 postings and had always found them difficult to predict because they behaved differently depending on how they felt, and how they felt changed too often. He read 4 pages of the file and then he sat down and did not say anything for a while. Then he sent a copy of the file to his section commander with no message, just the file. His section commander was a Drakathi, a species so distributed in their nerve clusters that they experienced almost no localized pain at all. A Drakathi could lose a limb and continue fighting without the kind of response other species had because the signal from the lost limb was spread so thin across their system that no single part of their brain screamed about it. Drakathi had always been considered the standard of physical endurance in the coalition, the bar that other species were measured against and found less than. The Drakathi commander read the file. Then she accessed the Human Physiological Index, the full version, and read the section on volitional pain suppression that Sareth had found the night before. She read it twice. Then she pulled up the coalition-wide database of continued operation through injury records. It ranked every species that had served in active coalition military roles by how frequently members of that species remained operational through injuries that should have removed them from duty. She had never looked at this particular table before. She had never needed to. She had always assumed she knew roughly what it showed. Drakathi were second. Humans were first, by a gap that was not close. She sat with that for a very long time. It was not that humans were tougher in body. Their bodies were ordinary. The table had a breakdown column that showed injury type alongside continued operation rate. Humans were continuing through injuries that should have been debilitating across species with far stronger biology. They were doing it not because they could not feel it. The pain suppression data made that clear. But because they were feeling it and then doing something that no other species had documented as consistently or at this scale. They were deciding it was not enough. Not unconsciously. Not because of some biological failsafe. The research attached to the table, a study published 11 years ago, that she had never thought to read, described the human decision process. It said humans in high-stress situations did not stop feeling. They assessed. They looked at the pain, and they looked at the situation, and they made a choice about which one mattered more right now. And they were doing this, the data showed, correctly. Their mission completion rates when injured were high. Their injury worsening rates when they continued operation were not, significantly elevated compared to species that stopped immediately. They knew how to carry it without breaking the thing they were carrying. The commander closed the files. She looked at her own hands. Trigothy hands, four-fingered like Vreth but wider. She had always been proud of what those hands could do without flinching. She picked up her communication pad and sent a message to the ship's medical department. The message asked Dr. Sareth to prepare a formal case summary of the incident for distribution to the Senior Crew Advisory Board. She did not explain why. She did not need to. In the crew quarters, Marcus Holley knew none of this. He was in his bunk. His shoulder was wrapped under the treatment seal, and his arm was in a light support sling. He was not sleeping. He was reading a physical book from Earth that he carried in a flat case under his bunk, because he liked the weight of real pages. The book was about rivers. He had no particular reason for liking books about rivers. He just did. He was not aware that his medical file was moving through the ship like water through dry ground. He was not aware that a Vreth engineer had forwarded it without comment. That a Drakathi commander had sat with a statistical table for 20 minutes and then sent a message to the medical department. That Faven had started this entire thing by accident over cold food. He turned a page. His shoulder ached under the seal. Not bad. The nerve block had faded to something manageable. He had felt worse. He had felt much worse and done more through it, and the memory of that was not pride. It was just data. Information about what the range of things was. Where this moment sat in that range. It sat at a 6. Maybe a 5 now. Fine. He kept reading about rivers. 2 decks above him, Commander Drethvo, decorated Vreth officer with 30 years of coalition service, was in his private office reading the file from start to finish. He had waited until he was alone. He did not know why he had waited. He just had. He read for a long time. When he finished, he sat very still. His office was small and clean, and everything in it was exactly where he put it. He was a precise man. He had always valued precision in a soldier, the ability to assess a situation and respond to it correctly without letting variables cloud the response. He thought about what it would take to assess a broken femur as a manageable variable, to look at cracked vertebrae and decide that the column of information they represented, severe pain, risk of paralysis, reduced mobility, was less relevant right now than the column that said, Yenna needed someone to walk with her. He thought about what kind of thinking that was. He picked up his communication pad and made 2 quiet changes to the ship's official records. The first was a formal unit citation for the most recent engagement, the skirmish where Marcus had taken the plasma hit. The citation had already been filed. Drethval added a commendation line. He backdated it to the same day as the injury. He did not flag it or announce it. The second change was a quarters reassignment. Marcus was currently in a lower deck shared bunk room with 3 other soldiers. Drethval moved him to a single upper deck quarters. Better air filtration. Better light. A window. He sent both changes to ship admin with no explanation. Then he went back to his work. He did not plan to tell Marcus why. He was not sure he could have explained it clearly enough to be worth saying. Some things were not about explanation. Some things were about a person sitting alone in a quiet room and reading 47 pages and coming out the other side, changed in a way that required no announcement. You just adjusted. You just moved someone to a room with a window because it seemed like the right thing to do, and you got on with your day. Marcus found out about the quarters change the next morning. An admin notification on his communication pad. He looked at it for a moment. He looked at the room number. He did not know why it had happened. He gathered his things and moved. The new room had a window that looked out at the stars. He put his book about rivers on the small shelf above the bunk. He did not ask why. Some things you just accept and keep moving. 3 weeks after the plasma burn, Sarah sat in a small room off the medical bay and wrote. He had been writing the same document for 9 days. It was not long, 12 pages in final form, but every line had a fondant. Taken longer than the last because he kept stopping to look at what he had written and then looking at the data and then changing the line because the line was not right yet. The document was a formal paper for the Coalition Medical Exchange, an academic submission. Sareth had submitted papers before, 6 of them in his career. They were technical, specific, small improvements to treatment protocols and drug calibrations. The kind of work that mattered in practice, but that no one outside the field would ever read. This paper was different. He knew it was different before he finished page 1. The title he settled on was this: Pain as Signal versus Pain as Variable. A re-examination of human neurological endurance, thresholds in active military contexts. He had written 7 other titles before this one. They were all too small. They did not say the actual thing. This one said the actual thing. He wrote about the classification system. The Coalition Medical Database had labeled humans as mid-tier endurance for 40 years. It had been based on biological comparison, skeletal density, nerve cluster depth, organ redundancy. Humans scored average or below in most categories. Mid-tier was the logical result of that math. Sareth wrote that the math was wrong, not the numbers. The numbers were accurate. The categories were wrong. The question being asked was wrong. Biological hardware was one way to measure endurance. It was the easy way. It was the obvious way. You looked at the body and you asked what it could take. It was not the right way. The right question, Sareth wrote, was not what can the body take. The right question was, what does the being do with what the body gives it? And when you asked that question, the data told a completely different story. He attached the coalition-wide continued operation table. He attached the human physiological research on volitional suppression. He attached case study data, anonymized, including one case that anyone on the GCS Undying Resolve would recognize by the injury pattern even without a name. He wrote about pain as a signal, which is what every medical text called it. A warning system, a stop sign built into the biology. He wrote that for most species, this was an accurate description of how pain functioned in practice. The signal reached the brain. The brain responded. The being stopped or slowed or called for help. Then he wrote about humans. He wrote that in humans pain was still a signal. Sareth was careful about this. He did not want to write something that was romantic instead of accurate. Humans felt pain, fully, completely. The signal arrived. The research was clear on that. They were not numb. They were not built differently. The pain reached them the same as it reached anyone. The difference was what they did after it arrived. He wrote that humans appeared to have developed through some combination of evolution and culture and individual training that the research had not yet fully mapped, the capacity to receive the pain signal and then file it. Not ignore it, file it, acknowledge it, note it, and then return their attention to whatever they had decided mattered more in this moment. He wrote that this capacity was not random. It was not bravado. It was not a death wish. The data showed that humans who continued operating through injury were, statistically, making accurate assessments. They were not getting worse at higher rates. They were not dying at higher rates from the injuries they continued through. They were evaluating, and they were evaluating correctly. He wrote his final line 11 times before he kept it. The human does not transcend pain. He receives it. He understands what it means. And then, with full knowledge of that meaning, he decides it is not a sufficient reason to stop. This is not biology. This is not accident. This is a choice made under the worst possible conditions by a being who knows exactly what the choice costs. Of all the things this reviewer has encountered in 30 years of coalition medicine, he cannot name one that requires more from a person than that. He submitted the paper at 0300 ship time, when the corridors were empty and quiet. He sat for a moment after he sent it. Then he went to bed. On the training deck 2 levels below, Marcus Hawley was running drills with a mixed unit. His shoulder seal had been removed 4 days ago. The tissue had closed clean. Sareth had checked it twice. There was a small scar, humans always scarred, that sat just below the shoulder joint, and would be there for the rest of Marcus's life along with the others. The drill was a breech and clear exercise. Nothing love. Simulation only. The unit was small, 6 soldiers from 4 different species. One of them was a young Kulhari named Tev. Tev had been on the ship for 2 months. This was his first active posting after training, and he was trying very hard not to look like he was trying hard. Marcus had noticed Tev because Marcus noticed things. It was not a special ability. It was just what happened when you spent 12 years in situations where missing something small got people killed. You learned to see small things. He had noticed Tev favoring his left side during the morning formation. The way he stood. The way he pivoted. Tev was right side dominant. That much was clear from his shooting stance and his movement pattern. But this morning, he kept his right wrist close to his body. Slightly. Just slightly. Enough that if you were not paying attention, you would not see it. Marcus was paying attention. After the drill, he walked over to Tev. He did not make it a big moment. He stood beside him and spoke quietly while both of them looked at the simulation playback on the wall screen. He said Tev's breach timing on the second door was good. Clean angle. Then he said that he had noticed Tev seemed to be protecting his right wrist. Tev went still. He said it was nothing. He said it was fine. Marcus looked at the screen. He said that was good if it was true. He said if it was not true, if there was something wrong with the wrist, then Tev should go get it looked at. Tev did not move. He said that it was a small thing. He said he did not want to seem weak in front of. He stopped. Marcus waited. Tev said he did not want to seem weak in front of the human soldiers in the unit. He said he had heard, everyone on the ship had heard by now, what was in Marcus's file. He said it seemed like a small thing to report compared to that. Marcus looked at him for a moment. He said that getting hurt was not weakness. He said that reporting it was not weakness. He said that letting something small become something large because you were too embarrassed to deal with it early, that was the thing that got people killed. He said it plainly, not unkindly, just as a fact the way you state a fact. He said to go get the wrist looked at. Tev went. Sareth was on duty when Tev came in. He scanned the wrist. Hairline fracture. Small. Easily treated. Another 3 days, and it would have been a full break. He applied a light seal and wrote the treatment note. On the intake form, there was a line that asked, required for all non-emergency, walk-in cases, who had referred the patient to medical. Tev told Sareth. Sareth looked at the name on the form for a moment. Sergeant Marcus Hawley. Referred by. He wrote it in. He finished the treatment note. He dated it. He saved the file. Then he sat back in his chair and was still for a moment in the quiet of the medical bay. He thought about a 21-year-old form in a 47-page file. A field medic writing refused evacuation in capital letters because there was no smaller way to write it. A man walking on broken bone through mountain terrain because the window was closing and the team needed to move. He thought about Tev coming through the door because someone had watched him in the drill and noticed a small thing and said the right words quietly without making it a performance. He thought about what kind of person watches for small things when they have large things of their own to carry. He thought about the last line of his paper, the line he had written 11 times, a choice made under the worst possible conditions by a being who knows exactly what the choice costs. He meant it about the pain, about the shoulder and the femur and the vertebrae and all the rest of it. He understood now that it was also about something else. About a young cavalry soldier standing too straight and trying too hard, and a human sergeant who had earned the right to look the other way and had chosen not to. Some people carried their pain so others could put down theirs. He had spent 30 years in coalition medicine measuring bodies, looking at bone density and nerve depth and organ redundancy and calling that endurance. He had been measuring the wrong thing. He looked at the intake form, referred by Sergeant Marcus Hawley. He looked at it for a long time. Then he smiled, just slightly, just for himself in the quiet room. It was the first time he had smiled in this medical bay in longer than he could honestly remember. Outside the window of the ship, the stars moved slowly past, the same stars that were visible from the small upper deck room, where a book about rivers sat on a shelf above a bunk. The room with the better air and the better light, and the window that looked out at nothing and everything. A room given without explanation by a commander who had read 47 pages and come out the other side changed. The stars did not care about any of this. They just burned, the way they had always burned, quietly, without stopping, without needing anyone to see.